Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum speaker webinar series and podcast. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have David Schenker, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute and former Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs in 2019 to 2021, join us to discuss how important is Jordan. Mr. Schenker will be speaking for 15 minutes and open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. David Schenker.
Thanks. It's good to be with the Middle East Forum today. So I was asked to talk a little bit about Jordan, about its stability, about threats to stability, about the importance of a stable Jordan for Israel and for the United States. What I'm going to do is start off with talking about the recent so-called coup attempt, which to my mind really wasn't a coup attempt. You had a family member, Hamza bin Hussein, the son of the late King Hussein, who had not entirely accepted the 1999 decision by King Abdullah to remove him as crown prince of the country. You'll recall at the time of the succession to King Hussein, King Abdullah, it was installed as his crown prince, Hamza, in the transition. Subsequently, King Abdullah chose to remove Hamza from that line of succession, replace him with his son Hussein. Obviously, Hamza had aspirations. A similar thing happened to Hassan, the brother of King Hussein, who had been crown prince for decades and was removed by Hussein right before he passed away. Hassan, King Hussein's brother, ultimately accepted his demotion. But Hamza was not pleased with it, apparently. And he was not necessarily conspiring against the king, as far as I can tell, but no doubt was talking with members of tribes, and there were some family discrepancies and dirty laundry that was aired publicly. So obviously, this is something that the king would not want to tolerate, nor would his son, the crown prince Hussein. And so they took steps. It's unclear whether there was a foreign role here. The Jordanian government has said that alternatively that there was, and then there wasn't a foreign role here. But there had been other people arrested, including Bassem al-Abdallah, who was one of the King Abdullah's advisors. He remains, I think, in detention in Jordan, but he had been an economic advisor and posted in Saudi Arabia. I think this issue is not finished entirely, but I think that there's no threat to the king's position. There's not going to be a military coup in the country. That said, there are challenges, and I think serious challenges to stability in the kingdom. And these primarily concern economics. The economy of Jordan is not good. In fact, it's terrible. I think they lost 140,000 jobs in 2002. They have an overall unemployment rate of 25%. Youth unemployment is now apparently up to 48%. They have a workforce of something like 2.6 million out of a country of 10 million. Just by way of comparison, Lebanon has a population of almost 7 million and has a workforce size of 2.3 million. Not many people work in Jordan. Certainly women don't work, but even if they wanted to work, they couldn't because there are no jobs. The economy has contracted by 5% last year. Tourism, which previously amounted to something like almost $6 billion of the $43 billion economy, that is down, according to the Jordanian government, by something like 48% in 2 months, the last 2 months. Remittances, another major source of income and revenue for the country. They used to be, something like $3.7 billion a year. They're down to less than 3 now because, of course, with COVID, people aren't employed next door in the Gulf like they were. Anyway, they have there's something like 53% of Jordanians who are vulnerable to food insecurity. Tefillah in the heartland of tribal Jordan, supporters of the king traditionally. 20% of Tefillah, this government, report food insecurity in their household, 20% of households. And then, of course, just overall in Jordan, some 28% of households report that their children have gone to bed hungry during the COVID lockdown. So this is a challenge. Jordan has a Chinese debt trap in Adarat. They have a power plant that for oil shale that was built at a time of greater energy insecurity. Now that prices are low and there is high supply and natural gas, et cetera, coming from Israel, this plant is costing Jordan something like $300 million a year. It will cost even more for them. That's a deficit when they start running it. And this is a country with a relatively small overall budget. They have an annual budget of something like $11 billion a year. I think in government revenue was something like 10 billion, they say, in 2019. But this year they're going to run almost a $3 billion deficit. And that's after, that's in their current budget. That's after the billions of dollars of international assistance that flows into Jordan, including something like $1.7 billion a year from the United States. So the situation is just not good. And you've seen lately a number of protests surrounding the economy and the handling of COVID, most recently in Salt, where the king had to go to talk to demonstrators because they ran out of oxygen in one of these hospitals, and a dozen or more people died. So it's not pretty. And of course, this economic privation not only results in protests, but it also results in disaffected youth, perhaps makes youth more vulnerable to recruitment into violent extremist groups, terrorist organizations, Islamist groups, etc. So the problem for stability in Jordan is really an internal matter that's related certainly to the economy, I think primarily to the economy. Now, but that does not mean the kingdom is unstable. It does not mean King Abdullah and the Hashemites are going anywhere. They're increasingly important to Israel and the United States. And I'll tell you why. I mean, let me just give you a few minutes of background. Israel and Jordan have had a very difficult time of it in recent years. And I can go through all the reasons, whether it's Israel agreeing to an economic water project in the south called the Red Dead, and then deciding a year or two after the agreement that they didn't want to proceed with it, Jordan losing confidence in Israel because of that. There was an incident at a bridge where a Jordanian Palestinian judge was killed entering into the West Bank. It happened that the video camera, surveillance camera at the border post wasn't working that day. And the stories vary differently. And then, of course, there was the terrorist attack at the U.S. embassy, the Israeli embassy in Amman, where a security guard had killed, I believe, 2 innocent people, in addition to the would-be terrorist. And the way that was handled in the aftermath was a point of contention between the Israelis and the Jordanians. More recently, of course, you had this issue with the Crown Prince Hussein trying to cross into Israel to visit the Temple Mount for a significant Muslim holiday, and was denied entrance. And I think they had reached an agreement before about how many security guards. In any event, in the aftermath, you'll recall that Bibi wanted to fly to the UAE, and Jordan denied the Israeli Prime Minister overflight clearance to fly over Jordan en route to the UAE. So there's some stresses in that relationship. Nevertheless, Jordan is, as you know, Israel's longest border, and there is a peace treaty with the Hashemites and with the Jordanian government. And this has been enduring since 1994. Within the nature of that agreement, Wadi Arva, there is a provision that provides for Jordan a special role in Jerusalem. And that is important to the Jordanians because part of their legitimacy in Jordan is their direct traceable lineage to the Prophet Muhammad and their former role in the Hijaz as the guardians of the holy spots. So this is a positive. I think Israel has traditionally viewed it as a positive, and I should hope that continues. Likewise, it's important to the United States that Jordan perseveres, notwithstanding the Abraham Accords, which has broadened the number of peace partners for Israel in the region to include Bahrain, the Emirates, Sudan, and Morocco. It's important because, and I would refer you to actually a speech given, I believe, in April 2021 by General McKenzie, the head of CENTCOM. And he talked about U.S. force posture. And he listed 3 priorities for the United States in the region. One of them being Iran, the other being counter ISIS, Al Qaeda, and the third one being pushing back on China. But he said in that context, and particularly in the context of Iran, he said, and I'm quoting here, the United States is pursuing opportunities to enhance expeditionary basing in less vulnerable positions in the CENTCOM AOR. Now, what does he mean by that? We have bases in Qatar, we have Al Udeid, we have bases in the Emirates, we have some military basing in Saudi Arabia. But as we've seen after the January 8 missile attack, the highly accurate missile attack by the Iranians against Ain al-Assad and Erbil, where U.S. military was present in the counter-ISIS campaign in Iraq, that these missiles are highly accurate and arrive very quickly, and light attack cruise missiles are very difficult to shoot down. And so in a way, what General McKenzie was talking about was the so-called Western Basing Initiative, where we actually move troops a little bit further away and move assets a little bit further away from Iran. We are still close enough where we can reach out if necessary, but our troops and our assets will be safer if we're a little further away. And what they're talking about here, as a critical node, is Jordan. And Jordan has always been an excellent partner for the United States and the U.S. military in that regard. Just one final word before I stop. Stability, there had been periodically resurfaces this argument that Jordan is Palestine. I'm not a subscriber to that. Jordan is 60% ethnically perhaps Palestinian. We don't know the exact number, a large number of Palestinians there. But the government, the palace, the people who make the decisions there are committed to Wadi Arva. They're committed to their relationship with the United States. And this provides security for Israel. Now, just imagine that it wasn't the Hashemites who were sitting in Amman and ruling Jordan. Just say that it was the Palestinians. You'd have an irredentist state, Palestinian state, with a long border with Israel that perhaps could be ruled by Hamas. This, I don't think, is in anybody's interest. It would look perhaps like another Lebanon on Israel's border. So I think we shouldn't be thinking in terms of Jordan as Palestine. I think we have a solid partner in King Abdullah and the Hashemite family, and a great asset of stability for not only the United States, but for Israel. Finally, the Abraham Accords. While there are an increasing number of peace partners out there, this not anyway does not diminish Jordan's position. The level of intelligence sharing, strategic cooperation between Israel and Jordan is very far advanced, and is of critical importance to both Israel and U.S. interests in the region. So Jordan's value doesn't diminish because Israel has now relations, strategic relations, perhaps advancing strategic relationship with the Emirates. These are all complementary, and the more states that Israel has these type of advanced strategic intelligence sharing relationships with, the safer Israel will be, and the better U.S. interests in the region will be served. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm happy to take your questions. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. So on your last point, we've been talking over the past few months about the warm peace versus the cool peace from the 1994 versus the most recent one. Is there a way that Jordan and Israel could achieve that warm peace that we're seeing with the UAE?
Like there can. I mean, there's some, there's some bad blood between a number of these Palestinians in the kingdom, no doubt, and Israel. But we've seen areas of cooperation that have been outstanding, beyond even the military cooperation, which I'm going to put aside for a minute. On the people-to-people level, you have hundreds of Jordanians going into Israel every day from Aqaba to Eilat to work in hotels. They're being provided COVID vaccines, and these people are being paid at salaries that far exceed what they would make in the kingdom. I actually, years ago, I was in Jordan and I took a cab somewhere in Amman, and I met somebody who said that he had lived in Aqaba and had done this, and said it was this wonderful experience. He made a lot of money, and it was great. Of course, the gas deal, I think, is very beneficial to the kingdom. We had a little hiccup in the water trade, exchanges. Israel typically provides more than they're obligated to Jordan. That got held up after Netanyahu's flight got canceled over Jordan. But still, I think if these areas can be expanded, trade, they had these QIZs that were successful for a while. Jordan has a free trade agreement. They're not so important. There are imported laborers, but they could, in Egypt, the QIZs employ huge numbers of Egyptians, and employment is a key issue for Jordanians. So there are areas, there's an economic zone they're trying to set up called the Jordan Gateway, which is on a piece of the Jordanian land and Israeli territory, and they built a bridge, and it would be like an economic free zone. I think these things are going to employ people, and people will see the real tangible benefits of peace. And hopefully Israeli tourists can return. Maybe Jordanian tourists will start to go to Israel now that the Emiratis are, et cetera. And maybe I'm just being too optimistic here, but I see potential.
Wonderful, thank you. So you talked about water. So water is going to be a very scarce resource in the near future. Does Israel and Jordan have an agreement to share the Jordan River water?
Well, it's not the Jordan River water. So there are, I think, agreements within Wadi Arava about how much water goes to Jordan and how much of the resource goes to Israel. But actually, Israel's got an enormous reservoir in the Kinneret. They also have, advanced desal capabilities. Now, Jordan's only ability to get water. They have a huge aquifer, which is, being lowered by the day because it's just being tapped too much. And Jordan, of course, depends on agriculture, and they grow things like bananas, which use a lot of water. But Israel has provided, and particularly in years where the rain levels have been high, has provided, millions of cubic meters more than they had to. And I think this has been actually another productive area of cooperation. It's not how much water, water is fungible. right? Israel can get it from desal. They want to have a reservoir. At the same time, they can release. And I think it's worked pretty well so far.
Wonderful, thank you. So how can Jordan continue to exist as a country with such a poor economy and with the Hashemite dynasty consisting of a small minority of the population?
Well, yeah, Jordan has been a debtor nation since 1943, but it has, really, I think, valuable real estate. It's all geography, and so they have been able to essentially charge rents. All right, people provide a lot of countries provide a lot of largesse donations to the kingdom to help sustain it. We tried to do a lot of development assistance with Jordan to try and put them on a better footing, and to work on getting Jordanians employed, to mixed success, really. We've
I'm sorry.
Is everybody gone? Or are they still there? I'm sorry.
We still have quite a few viewers. They can't wait to hear what you have to say on this.
Okay, what did I miss? Where am I?
We were talking about the economic situation in Jordan.
What was the question? About how it could survive? I think is when I
Yes.
broke. I said it's been unsustainable since 1943, and yet the kingdom's geography has enabled it to charge rent. And there have been just significant donations that used to come from the Gulf. Now it comes from Europe, primarily from the United States, and other countries. And we'll see, sometimes that has benefited them. The Gulf came through with a $5 billion in project aid a couple of years ago. Jordan would like to see more. And we'll see, how it goes. But I think countries have stepped up.
So in your opinion, can anything more be done by the West or neighboring oil-rich Gulf states to improve Jordanian economic situation?
Absolutely. I think they can invest more in the kingdom. I think they can to employ, to the extent possible, Jordanian laborers who can't find work in the kingdom. And these are, majority middle class accountants, doctors, lawyers, etc. There's a problem though with this trend, which is that Saudi has this Vision 2030, which talks about Saudiizing the labor force, and which means bringing in less people to do these, highly skilled jobs, that they can do that and farm them out to their own population and improve their own economy. That's going to be a challenge. They can invest in project aid in Jordan, put people to work. This has happened in the past. I think that would be beneficial. There is, I think, two problems that are perhaps cultural in Jordan. One is that women are more women go to college than any other people in the kingdom, than men. Very high percentage of graduates, highly talented, and extremely low workforce participation of women in the kingdom. So you're losing out on some of the most talented people in the kingdom in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship. Secondly, the leading employer in Jordan remains to this day the state. I don't know if it's 47% of the people are hired by the state. Now that's down from 60% in King Hussein's days, working for the state. But, these people, many of them, particularly tribal origin, don't really want to work in private companies, right? You would rather take, a quarter of the pay and be on the poverty line working for the government, where you don't have to go to work, you don't get paid very much, but you're employed for life, than working for a company where you can do, quite well. And so there's a predisposition of people from certain quarters of the population who don't want to work for anybody other than the government. So that's something that has to be changed too.
Understood. So we have a question in from Len. Most Arab countries seem to be against U.S. renewing the Iran deal. Is Jordan for or against the U.S. renewing this?
Well, Jordan hasn't come out and said anything. Of course, Jordan is among the states that is concerned with the fact that the JCPOA or a deal with Iran will provide Iran necessarily with huge access to cash, will take off all the sanctions and cash flush. What the Iranians typically do is fund even more their regional militia, whether they be Iraqi, Hashid, the Houthis in Yemen, the Fatimiyun or other Iranian-backed militia in Syria, and of course Hezbollah. And that's a concern to Jordan, as well as the increasingly advanced ballistic missile technology and UAV technology being provided to Iran's allies in the region. Now, Jordan, I believe, would like to see that, along with Saudi Arabia, UAE, et cetera, any agreement with Iran, take into account these other elements. That JCPOA, the nuclear deal, it's a threat, existential threat to every state that is Western oriented in the region, particularly Israel, but also states like Jordan, et cetera. But they'd like it to be widened, and I think are concerned that, like last time, when the JCPOA was signed by the Obama administration, that what was done was that these militia were never held to account for any of their activities, because these sanctions more sanctions for terrorism, for weapons proliferation, wouldn't be leveled by the Obama administration on the Iranians, because they feared that it would shake the foundations of the JCPOA. And so basically the Iranians got a free pass, carte blanche in the region under the JCPOA. They don't want to see that again. So I think they are concerned about it, but they've not come out and vocalized it yet.
Well, if you don't mind, if we go a few minutes over so we can get a few more questions in.
Sure.
All right, wonderful. So this question is from David Levine. In the past, Mossad alerted the royal family regarding impending coup attempts. Are the Israeli security services still vital to keeping the Jordanian monarchy on the front throne?
Oh, I think the cooperation is very helpful between the GID and between the Mossad. I think there are good working relationships, professional relationships, and deep level of cooperation, not only between the intelligence services, but also between military to military. And I think that these are deep and enduring, and it's not like with the Egyptians, for example, where the ties with Israeli officials or military officers or whatever are only at the highest levels, sort of the tip of the spear. I think these go down several levels. I don't think that is what is keeping the king in power. I want to be clear about that. I think the king has, the kingdom has, fantastic intelligence. They have a loyal military, and I think people in the kingdom, by and large, while they are not pleased with the status, the shape of the economy, I think they realize that they have stability, which counts for an awful lot when you look around the region.
Thank you. What is the likelihood of a change of leadership in Jordan, perhaps similar to what took place in Iran, which most experts didn't expect at the time?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about black swans and, whether there's going to be something that is totally unexpected. Khomeini after the Shah. Listen, I'm not going to put a number on that. I think, like I said, the king's in good shape, but he'd be in a lot better shape if he did more on to help improve the economy. He is trying, but once again, there are a number of structural barriers. It's a resource poor location. The population is relatively well educated, but these are the key issues for him. I don't want to predict. You can never predict when something's going to happen, but he's got a lot of backing.
Thank you. And this question is from Hal. How do Palestinian refugees affect the economy?
Well, the vast majority of Palestinian refugees and Palestinians in the kingdom have citizenship. This was unique to in the region among Palestinian refugees. You'll recall that Palestinians who went to Lebanon, there are 180,000 of them, give or take. They're now were never given citizenship. Actually, were never allowed to hold jobs. And so the leading employer of Palestinians in Jordan, in Lebanon, is UNRWA, which is, basically, I've said this before many times. The Lebanese love the Palestinian cause, but they hate Palestinians. They've not been mistreated anywhere like that in the Arab world. Although, we do remember Kuwait, when 400,000 Palestinians were thrown out of Kuwait in 1991 after Yasser Arafat supported Saddam in the invasion of Kuwait. These people had no rights, no citizenship, etc. They were just living there, residents. In Jordan, they have citizenship, and they are working. They are actually the entrepreneurial class in Jordan. Many of these people who are refugees and refugee camps in Jordan. It's not like, I've been to Jordanian refugee camps, many of them. I've been to refugee camps in Gaza. I've been to refugee camps in Lebanon. Refugee camps in Jordan are by and large cities, right? They don't have walls around them. People come and go as they please. And they work in the local economy just like everybody else. And are, once again, highly educated and highly motivated, and are the entrepreneurial class there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. In our last minute here, can you tell us where we can find some more of your work?
Yeah, well, so I'm a fellow, the Taub Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. So if you go to the website, I've written probably, 150 articles on Jordan. I wrote a book on Jordanian-Iraqi relations that'll be on there. But there's a lot of resources out there. So yeah, take a look. I've also written a number of articles, not about Palestinians, but some about Palestinian refugees at Middle East Quarterly, which I think the website for that.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you, Mr. Schenker, for taking time to speak with us today.
It's my pleasure. Sorry about the technical problems.
No problem whatsoever. For our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout for our weekly webinars offering email coming out over the weekend. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.